At midnight on our 5th wedding anniversary, I found my husband laughing with my best friend in a dive bar across town. When she saw me standing there, she said 4 words that shattered everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Hi everyone, I'm Maya, and before I tell you this story, I need you to understand something about me. I'm not the jealous type. I'm not the wife who checks her husband's phone or interrogates him about his whereabouts. I've always believed that trust is the foundation of any good marriage, and for 5 years, that belief served me well. Until the night I'm about to tell you about changed everything I thought I knew about the people closest to me. Let me introduce you to the players in this story because their relationships to me make what happened so much more complicated. First, there's my husband, Jake Sullivan. Picture a guy who still opens car doors, remembers to buy flowers for no reason, and has never once forgotten to kiss me goodbye in the morning. Jake's a construction project manager, which means he's used to solving problems and fixing things. He's got these warm brown eyes that crinkle when he laughs, and after 5 years of marriage, he still makes my heart skip when he walks through the door. At least he used to. Then there's Riley Parker, my best friend since our sophomore year at Northwestern. Riley is the kind of person who tells you when you have spinach in your teeth, when your outfit doesn't work, and when the guy you're dating is wrong for you. She's brutally honest, fiercely loyal, and has been my ride or die through every major life event. She was my maid of honor. She helped me pick out our apartment, and she's the first person I call when something goes wrong. She's a graphic designer with this wild curly red hair and an infectious laugh that can fill an entire room. Riley has never been married, always claiming she's too picky, but she's been dating my cousin Derek on and off for 2 years. My support system also includes my older sister, Bree Chen Martinez, who's a nurse and has this protective instinct that borders on fierce. Bree has never fully trusted any guy I've dated, including Jake, though she's warmed up to him over the years. She's married to Carlos and has twin boys who call me Aunt Maya and think Uncle Jake hung the moon. Then there's my mom, Linda Chen, who still believes in handwritten thank you notes and always asks if I'm eating enough vegetables. She adores Jake, probably more than she should, and constantly reminds me how lucky I am to have found someone so dependable. Now here's what you need to understand about Jake and me. We have traditions, small ones that might seem silly to other people, but they matter to us. Every morning, whoever wakes up first makes coffee for the other. On anniversaries, we text each other at exactly the same time we got married, which was 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning 5 years ago. We always go to the same restaurant where Jake proposed, and we always spend the evening talking about our favorite memory from that year. These traditions became even more important recently because, if I'm being completely honest, things had been different between us for the past few weeks. Not bad different, just different. Jake had been working later, seeming more distracted, less present during our conversations. When I'd ask him about his day, his answers felt shorter, less detailed. He'd sit on the couch, scrolling his phone, instead of suggesting we watch a movie together. Small changes that individually meant nothing, but together created this nagging feeling in the back of my mind that something was shifting. But I pushed those feelings down because this is Jake we're talking about. Jake, who still leaves little notes in my lunch bag. Jake, who remembers that I like my coffee with oat milk, not regular milk. Jake, who has never given me a single reason to doubt him. So when our 5th anniversary morning arrived, I woke up with that familiar excitement, ready to celebrate another year of what I genuinely believed was a solid, happy marriage. I had no idea that by midnight I'd be standing in a dimly lit bar, staring at a scene that would make me question everything I thought I knew about the 2 people I trusted most in the world. The 4 words Riley said that night didn't just break my heart. They revealed a truth so unexpected, so completely different from what I imagined, that it changed how I think about love, trust, and the stories we tell ourselves when we don't have all the facts. That morning started like every anniversary we'd shared. I woke up at 7:30 a.m. with butterflies in my stomach, the good kind that come with anticipation. Jake was already in the shower, humming something off-key like he always does when he's in a good mood. I could hear the water running and smell his coffee brewing on a timer, which meant he'd remembered to set it the night before. Small details, but they mattered to me because they felt normal, familiar, like the Jake I'd always known. I padded to the kitchen in my pajamas and added a splash of vanilla to his coffee, the way he likes it on special occasions. Then I grabbed my phone and typed out our traditional anniversary text. "Happy 5th anniversary, babe. Can't wait to celebrate tonight." I hit send at exactly 8 a.m., the same time we'd said our vows 5 years ago at that little chapel in Napa Valley. Usually, Jake responds within minutes. Usually, I get something sweet back, maybe a photo of him making a heart with his hands, or a text saying he can't wait to see me later. But as I watched my phone screen, the little delivered notification appeared, and then nothing. No response, no immediate ping back. I shrugged it off. Jake was probably rushing to get to the job site, and his phone was likely buried in his work bag. He'd been managing this big commercial project downtown, and the client had been demanding, requiring early morning meetings and constant updates. I understood that work came first sometimes, especially when deadlines were tight. While I waited, I went through my own morning routine with extra care. I'd taken the day off from my marketing job specifically so I could prepare for our evening. I'd made reservations at Marcello's, the intimate Italian restaurant where Jake had proposed 3 years earlier. The same corner table where he'd nervously fumbled with the ring box while trying to order wine. The same place where the elderly waiter, Giuseppe, had started crying when Jake got down on one knee. I spent the morning getting ready like it was our wedding day all over again. I'd bought a new dress specifically for this night, a deep emerald green number that hugged my curves in all the right places. Jake always said green was his favorite color on me, that it brought out the gold flecks in my brown eyes. I curled my hair, did my makeup with extra attention, and even painted my nails the same soft pink I'd worn on our wedding day. By noon, I was checking my phone every few minutes. Still no response to my anniversary text. I tried to push down the tiny knot of worry forming in my stomach. Jake wasn't a big texter during work hours, I reminded myself. He was probably knee-deep in blueprints and construction schedules. I called him around 1 p.m. just to hear his voice and confirm our dinner time. It went straight to voicemail. His usual message played, "You've reached Jake Sullivan. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." I didn't leave one. What was I going to say? "Hi, honey. Just wondering why you haven't acknowledged our anniversary yet." That's when my mind started playing tricks on me. I began replaying the past few weeks, looking for signs I might have missed. Jake coming home later than usual, claiming the project was behind schedule. The way he'd been quieter during dinner, scrolling through his phone instead of talking to me about our days. How he'd seemed distracted when I mentioned our anniversary plans last week, just nodding along without his usual enthusiasm. But then I'd remember the good moments too. Just 3 nights ago, he'd brought home my favorite Thai takeout without me asking. Last weekend, he'd spent Saturday morning fixing the squeaky hinge on our bedroom door that had been driving me crazy for months. These weren't the actions of a man who'd lost interest in his marriage. By 3 p.m., I was alternating between excitement and a growing sense of unease. I kept telling myself that Jake was planning something special, that maybe his lack of response was part of some elaborate surprise. Maybe he was coordinating with Riley to throw me a party, or perhaps he was picking up a gift and wanted to tell me in person. I decided to focus on the positive. Tonight was going to be perfect. We'd have dinner at our special place, we'd laugh about how worried I'd been over nothing, and we'd celebrate 5 years of marriage. I had no way of knowing that by the time midnight came around, I'd be questioning everything I thought I knew about my husband and my best friend. By 6 p.m., the knot in my stomach had grown into a full-blown pit of anxiety. Jake still hadn't responded to my anniversary text, and our dinner reservation at Marcello's was in 2 hours. I'd called him 3 more times since the afternoon, and each call went straight to voicemail. This wasn't like him. Even on his busiest days, Jake found a way to check in. I decided to reach out to Riley. If anyone could talk me down from my growing panic, it would be her. I texted her. "Jake hasn't responded to my anniversary text all day and isn't answering his phone. Should I be worried?" Her response came back quickly. "Maybe he's planning a surprise." You know how guys get weird about anniversaries?
Remember when Derek disappeared for 2 days before my birthday and showed up with that ridiculous karaoke machine? Riley's logic made sense, but something still felt off. I grabbed my keys and decided to drive by Jake's current job site, a new office complex about 20 minutes from our house. Maybe his phone really had died, and he was so buried in work that he'd lost track of time. The construction site was eerily quiet when I pulled up. No trucks, no workers, no sign that anyone had been there recently. Jake's signature navy blue F-150 was nowhere to be seen. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, scanning the area and feeling increasingly foolish. What was I doing? Tracking down my husband like some kind of private investigator? That's when I decided to call Marcus Rivera, Jake's work buddy and occasional drinking companion. Marcus had been on Jake's crew for 3 years, and if anyone would know where Jake was, it would be him. "Hey, Maya," Marcus answered on the second ring. "What's up?" "Hi, Marcus. Sorry to bother you, but I'm looking for Jake." He's not answering his phone, and I was wondering if you knew where he might be. There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. "Oh, Jake left around 3 p.m. today. Said he had something important to handle." "Something important? Did he say what?" Another pause. "No, he just seemed, I don't know, excited about something, like he had good news to share or something." Marcus's tone was off. Normally he was chatty and easygoing, but he sounded almost nervous, like he was choosing his words carefully. When I hung up, I felt more confused than reassured. Back home, I paced around our living room, my heels clicking against the hardwood floor. I'd spent so much time getting ready that I looked ridiculous now, all dressed up with nowhere to go and no husband to go with. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror and barely recognized the anxious woman staring back at me. That's when my sister Bree called. "Hey sis, just wanted to wish you a happy anniversary. How are you celebrating tonight?" I broke down and told her everything. The unanswered text, the missing husband, the empty job site, Marcus's weird response. As I spoke, I could hear the worry creeping into my own voice. "Maya, this isn't like Jake," Bree said, her nurse training kicking in with that calm, analytical tone she used in emergencies. "Have you checked your bank accounts? Maybe there was some kind of emergency." That hadn't even occurred to me. I logged into our joint checking account on my laptop, and my blood ran cold. There had been an ATM withdrawal that afternoon at 3:47 p.m. $800, cash. From a Wells Fargo branch I'd never heard of, in a part of town Jake had no reason to visit. "Bree," "I'm getting worried. Please just let me know you're okay. Our reservation was 2 hours ago." I sat on our couch in my beautiful green dress, staring at my phone and feeling like a complete fool. 5 years of marriage, and I was spending our anniversary alone, wondering if my husband was lying in a hospital somewhere, or worse, if he'd decided our marriage wasn't worth celebrating anymore. The not knowing was killing me. So at 11:30 p.m., I made a decision that would change everything. At 11:30 p.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I was sitting on our couch in my anniversary dress, surrounded by the remnants of what was supposed to be a perfect evening. The takeout menu from Marcello's was still on the coffee table where I'd thrown it after cancelling our reservation. My phone showed 19 missed calls to Jake, all unanswered. The silence in our house felt suffocating. I made a decision that went against every rational part of my brain. I was going to find my husband. I grabbed my purse and car keys, my hands shaking slightly from a combination of adrenaline and anxiety. As I walked to my car, I tried to think like Jake. Where would he go if he needed space? Where would he go to think, to decompress, or to handle whatever important business Marcus had mentioned? My first stop was Murphy's Grill, the sports bar where Jake and I had our first official date. It was the kind of place he'd go for comfort food and familiar faces. I drove the 12 minutes there with my heart pounding, rehearsing what I'd say if I found him. Would I be angry, relieved, both? Murphy's was busy for a Thursday night, filled with the usual crowd of after-work drinkers and late-night diners. I scanned every table, every bar stool, looking for Jake's familiar silhouette. The bartender, Tommy, recognized me and waved. I waved back but kept searching. No Jake. "Looking for your husband?" Tommy called out over the noise. "Haven't seen him tonight." Strike one. My second stop was Riverside Park, specifically the bench overlooking the lake where Jake had proposed. It sounds ridiculous now, but I thought maybe he'd gone there to think about our marriage, about us. The park was dark and empty except for a jogger with a reflective vest and earbuds. I sat in my car for 5 minutes, staring at our bench, feeling more foolish by the minute. Strike two. Next, I drove to Jake's brother Danny's house across town. Danny was going through a messy divorce, and maybe Jake had gone there to offer support or advice. But Danny's driveway was empty, and all the lights were off. I didn't want to wake up his kids by knocking, so I sat outside for another 10 minutes, watching and waiting for any sign of life. Strike three. By this point, it was nearly midnight, and I was running out of logical places to look. That's when I remembered Jake mentioning O'Malley's pub a few weeks ago. He'd said some guys from work had taken him there after they'd finished a particularly difficult phase of the downtown project. It wasn't the kind of place Jake usually frequented, a dive bar on the outskirts of town that catered to construction workers and locals who valued cheap beer over atmosphere. I almost didn't go. O'Malley's was 20 minutes in the opposite direction, in a part of town I rarely visited. But something told me to check. Maybe because it was the last place anyone would expect to find Jake Sullivan, the man who preferred craft beer and restaurants with cloth napkins. As I drove through the increasingly unfamiliar neighborhoods, my mind raced with possibilities. Maybe Jake was having some kind of midlife crisis. Maybe the pressure of work had gotten to him, and he needed a night to blow off steam with the guys. Maybe he'd simply lost track of time and his phone had died hours ago. When I finally pulled into O'Malley's parking lot, my heart nearly stopped. There, parked under a flickering streetlight, was Jake's navy blue F-150 truck. The same truck I'd been looking for all day, sitting there like it belonged. I sat in my car for a full minute, trying to calm my racing pulse. This was it. I was about to get answers to all the questions that had been tormenting me for hours. I checked my appearance in the rearview mirror, smoothed my hair, and took a deep breath. The bar's neon sign cast everything in an eerie red glow as I walked toward the entrance. Through the large front windows, I could see inside. The place was dimly lit, with dark wood paneling and the kind of atmosphere that encouraged people to mind their own business. And that's when I saw them. Jake was sitting in a corner booth, his back partially to the window. But I'd recognize those broad shoulders anywhere. He was leaning forward, animated in conversation, laughing in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. But it wasn't the laughter that made my blood run cold. It was who he was laughing with. Sitting directly across from my husband, leaning in close with her wild red curls catching the dim bar light, was Riley. My best friend Riley. The woman who had been my maid of honor, who knew all my insecurities, who I'd called just hours earlier for reassurance about this exact situation. My legs felt like they might give out beneath me. I stood frozen outside O'Malley's, watching through the window as Jake threw his head back in laughter at something Riley had said. They looked so comfortable together, so natural, like they'd done this 100 times before. Riley had her phone out on the table, and they were both looking at the screen, their heads nearly touching. This couldn't be happening. Not Jake, not Riley, not on our anniversary. But there they were, in a dive bar I'd never heard Jake mention until recently, at midnight on the day that was supposed to celebrate our marriage. The $800 withdrawal suddenly made sense. The missed calls, the ignored texts, Marcus's nervous energy when I'd asked about Jake's whereabouts. How long had this been going on? How had I been so blind? I pushed through the heavy wooden door of O'Malley's, the smell of stale beer and fried food hitting me immediately. The bar was louder than it had seemed from outside, filled with the sounds of pool balls clacking, classic rock playing from speakers, and the low hum of conversation. A few patrons glanced my way, probably wondering what a woman in a fancy green dress was doing in a place like this at midnight. I walked toward their booth on unsteady legs, my heart hammering so hard I was sure everyone in the bar could hear it. Jake had his back partially to me,
but I could see Riley's face clearly now. She was glowing, absolutely radiant in a way I'd never seen before. Her eyes were bright, her cheeks flushed, and she had this secret smile that made my stomach turn. When I was about 10 feet away, Riley looked up and saw me. For a split second, her face registered pure shock. Her mouth fell open and she went completely still. Then, inexplicably, her expression shifted to something I couldn't quite read. Not guilt, not fear. Something that looked almost like joy. "Maya!" she exclaimed, loud enough that Jake spun around in his seat. The look on Jake's face when he saw me was one I'll never forget. Pure panic mixed with confusion, like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar who couldn't figure out how his mom had found him. "Maya, what are you doing here?" Jake stammered, his face going pale under the bar's dim lighting. I opened my mouth to speak, to demand answers, to ask how long this had been going on. But no words came out. I just stood there, staring at the two people I trusted most in the world, feeling like the biggest fool who had ever lived. That's when Riley did something that completely threw me off balance. Instead of looking guilty or trying to explain, she broke into the biggest smile I'd ever seen. She practically bounced in her seat and held up her left hand, wiggling her fingers. "Surprise!" she said, her voice filled with genuine excitement. "We got married." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "What?" "Derek and I got married," Riley repeated, laughing now. "Today, this afternoon, at the courthouse." My brain struggled to process what she was saying. Derek. My cousin Derek, who worked on oil rigs overseas and had been dating Riley on and off for 2 years. Not Jake. Derek. "Jake was my witness," Riley continued, practically glowing with happiness. "Derek flew in this morning and surprised me with a proposal. Can you believe it? After all this time of saying he wasn't ready for commitment, he shows up with a ring and says he can't wait another day to marry me." Jake finally found his voice. "Riley called me in a panic around 2 p.m. Derek had surprised her. They were getting married at 4 p.m., and she needed a witness. She didn't want to tell you over text, and Derek's family couldn't make it on such short notice." I stared at Riley's hand, and sure enough, there was a simple gold band on her ring finger, a ring that definitely hadn't been there when I'd seen her 3 days ago at the coffee shop. "You're married?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the bar noise. "I'm married!" Riley squealed, and suddenly she was out of the booth and hugging me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I wanted to tell you immediately, but Jake convinced me we should surprise you properly. We were planning to show up at your door at midnight with champagne and wedding cake." The relief that flooded through me was so intense I thought I might collapse. Not an affair. A wedding, a surprise, a celebration. Standing there in that dimly lit dive bar, being squeezed to death by my newly married best friend, I felt like I was experiencing emotional whiplash. Relief, embarrassment, joy, and a lingering ache of hurt all crashed together in my chest. I wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. "I can't believe you're married," I said into Riley's shoulder, my voice muffled by her curls. "I can't believe Derek finally proposed." "I can't believe it either," Riley laughed, pulling back to look at me. "You should have seen him, Maya. He showed up at my apartment this morning with this little velvet box saying he'd realized during his last rotation offshore that he couldn't spend another day not being my husband." Jake stood up from the booth, and I could see the guilt written all over his face. "Maya, I am so sorry. I should have found a way to call you, to let you know what was happening. Your feelings today were completely valid." "My phone died around 10 a.m., he continued, running his hand through his hair the way he always did when he was stressed. I was so caught up in Riley's excitement and trying to help coordinate everything that I didn't even think to find a charger until it was too late. And then, Riley convinced me to wait to tell you so we could surprise you properly. Riley nodded enthusiastically. I wanted to see your face when we told you. I was so excited I could barely contain myself. But Jake was right. I should have let him call you immediately. I didn't think about how this would look, especially on your anniversary. The three of us sat down in the booth, and slowly, piece by piece, the day's mystery unraveled. The $800 withdrawal wasn't for anything secretive. It was Jake helping Riley pay for her last-minute wedding dress and the celebration dinner they'd had with Derek after the courthouse ceremony. Derek had paid Jake back, but not until after banking hours. We came here because it was the only place we could think of where we wouldn't run into anyone we knew, Jake explained. Riley was too excited to go home, and Derek had to catch a red-eye flight back to the rig tonight. We were planning their honeymoon and looking at pictures from the ceremony. As I listened to their explanations, I felt a mix of relief and growing embarrassment. Here I'd been, imagining the worst-case scenario, when in reality my husband had been helping my best friend navigate one of the happiest days of her life. But underneath the relief, there was still hurt. Not because of what they'd done, but because of what I'd put myself through. The hours of anxiety, the jumping to conclusions, the immediate assumption that the two people I loved most were betraying me. I'm sorry, too, I said finally. I should have trusted you both more. I should have asked questions instead of assuming the worst. Jake reached across the table and took my hand. You have nothing to apologize for. I disappeared on our anniversary without explanation. Any wife would have been worried and upset. But I went straight to thinking you were having an affair, I admitted, my cheeks burning with embarrassment. I didn't even consider that there might be a perfectly innocent explanation. Riley looked at me with understanding in her eyes. Maya, your parents' divorce really messed with your head about trust. Remember how your dad disappeared for days before your mom found out about his affair? Of course, your mind would go there. She was right. I'd been 12 when my father left for a business trip that turned into him moving in with his secretary. I'd watched my mother go through the same cycle of worry, confusion, and devastating discovery that I'd put myself through today. I learned something important today, I said, looking between Jake and Riley. I learned that the stories we tell ourselves in our heads can be so much scarier than reality. I spent hours today convinced my marriage was falling apart, when really I was just missing information. Jake squeezed my hand, and I learned that communication isn't optional, even when you're trying to plan a surprise. Your feelings matter more than any surprise. We ended up staying at O'Malley's until closing time, celebrating Riley's marriage and talking through everything that had happened. By the time we left, I felt closer to both of them than I had in months. That night, Jake and I made a pact. We promised each other that we'd always communicate first, assume the best second, and panic last. We decided that no surprise, no matter how wonderful, was worth putting each other through unnecessary pain. And Riley? Well, she's still my best friend, but now she's also the reason I learned one of the most important lessons of my marriage. Love isn't just about trust, it's about having the courage to ask the hard questions before your mind fills in the scary blanks. Have you ever jumped to the wrong conclusion about someone you love? Let me know in the comments. I promise I'll read every single one. You know what? Looking back on that night, I'm actually grateful it happened. Not for the hours of anxiety and heartbreak I put myself through, but for what it taught me about my marriage and myself. Sometimes the universe gives us exactly the wake-up call we need, even when it comes disguised as our worst nightmare. Jake and I are stronger now because of this story resonated with you, or if you've ever found yourself in a similar situation where your imagination ran wild with worry, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Seriously, share your stories, the good, the bad, and the embarrassingly paranoid. We're all human, and we've all been there. And hey, if you enjoyed this roller coaster of a story, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps me know what kind of content you want to see more of. Also, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell, because I share real-life stories like this every week. Stories about relationships, family drama, unexpected twists, and all the messy, beautiful chaos that comes with being human. I've got some amazing stories coming up that